All right, now that we have our pool asset complete, let's go ahead and turn our attention over to the ladder. We're going to be breaking the ladder asset up into several videos so that we can keep everything nice and focused. Let's go ahead and jump over here to the whiteboard. Once again, we're going to get away from drawing out networks unless we absolutely have to. In my opinion, there's no real whiteboarding that's needed for the ladder. I'm just going to do some very simple sketches. The bottom line is this. Everything that you've seen so far is kind of going to be put together into the creation of the ladder. So it's just going to be a lot of things that you've seen, but we're going to be using a little bit of everything, including some deformation, some skinning, the whole 9 yards. So in this video, what Steve is going to do is really we're just going to be focusing on creating the pole and the diving board itself. Now we call this the ladder, but in essence it's really a ladder, it's a pole and the diving board at the top. So we're going to start out with a line. We're going to put a circle into the scene. And then we're going to use a sweep sop so that we can skin this guy, basically stretching him along our line. And by doing this, we're going to have a tube. So this may make you wonder, well, why didn't you use a tube to begin with? Because that would have just been one node. Well, we're going to be reusing this line right here. This is going to work out really well as a line that we can use to copy rungs from the actual ladder to. And we'll talk more about that when we get to that video. So after we sweep this, we've got a tube. Then we're going to create a box, and we're going to position that box, something like such. We'll size it up so that it looks like a diving board. And we will, as you can see here, we've scooted it back just a little bit so it's not sitting flush with the edge of the pole. And then we'll make sure to add plenty of divisions in this direction. Of course, these divisions come around as well, like such. And we need the divisions because we're going to be using a twist sop. And with the twist sop, of course, we need to be able to bend it so that we can have, and here's a side view. Here is our side view representation of the diving board on top of the pole, and we need to have this guy be capable of bending like such, and perhaps even just a slight amount up as well, so when our character bounces off it's kind of one of those type effects. Cool. But we need this detail in the box in order for the deformation to give us exactly what we're looking for, which is this effect right here. So that is what we've got lined up in this video. Steve, let's go ahead and jump over into Houdini real quick.
Fantastic.
And start putting this guy together.
So I'm going to jump over into Houdini. I'm going to jump up to object level, and I'm going to create a new geometry object. And let's rename this to ladder. And then I'm going to push enter to jump inside and delete out the file. And we'll start by creating the circle that's going to be used to sweep our pole.
Okay.
So I'm going to push tab to bring up the tab menu, type circle, drop a circle in place, and I'm going to rename this to board, pole, circle. I'm going to set up a relationship so that radius y follows radius x, so let's ch rad x, just so that we always have a perfect circle. And I'm going to set the primitive type to NURBS curve. I'm going to leave the radius just at 1 for now, and then in a second, once we have a few nodes in our network, we'll create our asset and promote this up as one of our parameters for the asset. So let's create a line now. So I'm going to create a line sop. The line sop by default comes in pointing up in Y. That's fantastic for what we need. I am going to boost the length of the line, the distance of the line, to around something like 15 for now, and again this will be a parameter that we control on our asset. Fantastic. So I'm going to rename this guy to board height template. So now that we've got the line and the circle, we can sweep these together. So I'm going to create a sweep sop. And if we middle click on the inputs, we can see that the cross section is input 1 and the backbone is input 2. So a circle can be our cross section and the line can be our backbone. We can see we take the circle and we sweep it up, but we need to create an actual skinned surface from this. And to do that, I'm going to switch over to the output tab and I'm going to choose to skin unclosed, and that's going to create the pole surface. Now we don't need to worry about creating caps for this pole because the bottom's going to sit on a stage and the top is going to be up underneath our board. So we've got 3 nodes here, so I think that's enough to begin our asset with.
Oh yeah.
So I'm going to select all of our nodes, Shift-C to collapse them down to a subnet which I will rename to ladder. I'm going to right click on the subnet and come down to create digital asset. So let's name this ladder with the label ladder again. We don't need inputs. Let's create an OTL file for our ladder. So ladder.otl, accept. And I'm going to just install to the current hip file and accept. And from the type properties, I'm going to create a geometry folder. And let's promote up just a couple of parameters from our existing nodes. So let's hunt down our line. Let's just resize it slightly. And I want to grab the distance from our line. And let me undo that because we've got prefixes on the name. So I'm going to grab this guy and delete him. I'm going to turn off prefix, name, and label.
Yeah, just to keep it clean.
Yeah, so let's grab distance, promote him over, much nicer. I'm going to rename this to height because really the height of the pole I'm going to use as the height of the entire asset. So it's going to control the height of the diving board and also the height of the ladder. So I want this just to be the overall height as opposed to something like pole height.
Yeah.
I also want to grab the radius in X of our circle, and I'll rename this to something like
pole radius?
Yeah, pole radius sounds great. So pole radius. I'm going to set the pole radius so that it cannot go quite down to 0. I'm going to also lock the height so it can't quite go down to 0. So let's accept that. And jump back into Houdini. Fantastic, so that's our pole. So now we can deal with creating our board. So I'm going to push tab and drop in a box. And I'm going to rename the box to diving board box. We've got our box, so let's set some temporary size values. Well, the size in Y is always going to be 0.2. But in X and Z, we're actually going to control these with parameters in a second. But I'm thinking 10 for now in X and something like 3 in Z. So we can see that this is the length of our diving board and Z is our width of the diving board. So let's deal with positioning this box. I'm also going to uncheck consolidate corner points. And let's template in our pole so that we can see everything nice and clearly. So I'm going to set center Y so that we sit our box on top of our pole, and to do that I'm going to take that height parameter that we created on our asset and use that in center Y. And that's going to sit us up so that we're halfway, basically sitting centered up on the top of the pole, which I'm happy with, and unless you think we should shift it up a little bit, taking into our height, I'm very happy with that. So center X is going to be slightly interesting, so let's do this in stages. I want to offset in the negative X direction. I just want this to be the diving part of the pole. That's just an arbitrary choice. So I'm going to offset by our size in X divided by 2, and that's going to push us over so we're centered up on the pole. I'm then going to come back based on the pole radius. We know that the radius of the pole is controlled by our circle. So let's grab our board, pole, circles, radius in X. And that'll move us back so that we're flush with the edge, but I really would like a small amount of overlap. So I'm just going to add just a small amount, something like 0.3 onto that, just so that we get a small amount of overlap. And what this does mean is if we start changing our pole radius, we still get an overlap, which is fantastic. I'm also going to change this over to be a polygon mesh so that we can add some detail to this guy to allow us to actually get the deformations we're after. We need more divisions in X, since X is the axis that's going to be bending. And so I'm going to give this guy a 20 divisions in X, and that'll be plenty for our animation to take place. So with that, we can promote up our size in X and Z as parameters to our asset. So I'm going to right click on our ladder asset and come down to type properties. and I'm going to right click on size X and export parameter to type properties. Right click on size Z, export parameter to type properties. I'm going to put both of these into our geometry folder and rename these appropriately. So size X is going to become our board length. And I'm going to lock that at 0.001 as a minimum. And size Z is going to become our board width. And again, I'm going to just lock this at 0.001 as a minimum. And accept. I want to be able to see both of these pieces of geometry,
sure.
So let's wire them into a merge. Let's grab both of these guys, wire them into a merge. I will rename this to merge all. And when we create our ladder, we'll wire him into that merge as well. So that's everything in terms of creating geometry in this video. I do want to set up the system for animating the board in this video. And we're going to do that by wiring our box into a twist stop and setting up the twist stop to allow for deformation. So I'm going to right click on the output of the box and create a twist stop. And we can see with the current settings that's not quite correct. We want to apply a bend operation. Now the primary axis, which axis are we going to be bending in? Primarily we're going to be bending up and down in Y. So our primary axis is Y. That's going to create an error because you can't have primary and secondary axis are the same. What's our secondary axis? Well, that's going to be X, because you can think we're taking our X axis and we're bending that up and down in Y. We also need to alter our pivot because currently we're bending about the origin, which kind of looks really weird. So let's alter our pivot so that we bend from the top of our box, basically from the top of our pole. So our pivot in X, I'm going to offset in the positive X direction to, let's bring in our tube. I'm going to offset to this point. We know this to be the origin. If we offset in positive X by the radius of the circle, we'll offset to here. So pivot in X is going to be a positive offset of our board, pole, circle, radius in X. And in Y, I'm going to set it to be whatever our Y position of our box happens to be. So that's going to be our diving, board, box, translation in Y. That's going to move the pivot up to here. Didn't look like that took. Right, let's try again. So board, pole, circle, radius X. There we go, fantastic. So that's going to now bend us from that corner. We still haven't quite got it. If we start looking at this bend, still looks really weird. We're going to change this roll-off value so that we can get a much nicer roll-off. So I'm going to start decreasing this. And I'm going to decrease to negative 0.7. You can see the effect that was having on the bend, pushing us further and further back here. So now,
very nice.
We get the bend as we'd like. So I'm going to set the strength down to 0 and promote this up to our asset, and then we're done for this video. So I'm going to right click on our ladder asset, come down to type properties. I'm going to right click on strength, export parameter to type properties, and let's call this board bend. And I'll give it the label board bend strength. And we can set up the range for this guy as well. I'm thinking negative direction should bend. I believe negative will be down and positive will be up. We'll find out in a second. So if I bring up our parameters, negative's up, positive's down. So I wanted to go to negative 10 and then positive 20. There's a 50% chance, and when that's the case, you always get it wrong. So negative 10, positive 20 on our range, accept. Bring up our parameters. That didn't take. Sweet. Apparently it did take. I've had this, it seems to be a bug, sometimes they don't take. I find if you lock them, accept.
There it goes.
And then you unlock them, So I bring up the type properties again and unlock them. Accept. And parameters. There we go. Fantastic. Cool. So yeah, I have hit that issue before. So if you just lock them and unlock them, it forces Houdini to actually update the values, and then everything seems to be fine. You'll also notice I dragged the board strength parameter up underneath the geometry folder, whereas before it was external to the geometry folder.
Sure. Very nice.
Cool. So yeah, that's a very simple video, but that's everything I wanted to cover in this video.
Okay. Well, that's going to wrap it up. Thanks a lot.